All right.
Quickly found Starbucks. 24 times as much for coffee as when we were there.
Oh, it is.
Little you get like
Are you really?
Oh, yeah, so we have first games this on
You got
Saturday.
your husband really is feeling better? Did they know what caused it?
Game, yeah, so now I'm working on
We had them revise the traffic flow, what the new stuff is.
They're gonna, what are they gonna do?
out there one time. Everyone has to sit.
No, they're gonna reconfigure the
They're gonna reconfigure the island.
Italy.
But it's fun. I have a good group of kids. And my son played last year, so it's in,
That's what we suggested, so.
I kind of know what I'm getting into. So that doesn't mean I'm going to do well, but I know what I'm getting into.
Does it take?
Oh, I'm sorry, my step's saying that.
You just have to, because I coached for years, you just have to watch out for the
Entrance to the drive-through where you order, you can really only have
coaching them up right.
one, maybe two cars.
Oh, yeah. Just do a lot of listening and very little talking. Because a lot of them just want to win.
So if that's like, yeah, you just can't come in that way because.
Right?
It's my little league club.
You're going to think this is the dirt.
This is mine back here, that's Bobby's midfield.
That's right.
And your misjudgment.
I'll give you more room. I can go this way. No, the blue's you. I'm pretty sure. Let me see.
Oh, this is awesome.
Yeah, that's you. I've got mine separate.
Is there any way to turn off my mic?
So yeah, they're all,
A lot of local people.
you can.
They are.
I think the big thing is, just making it one way.
I'm on. Cool. Okay, what we do is,
All right, good evening and welcome to the June 15th meeting of the Westborough Planning Board. I will read the governor's, oh, no, I don't have to do that.
you don't know what to do now.
I would be happy not to read that again. All right, we have several items on the agenda. We have a continued public hearing for the site plan review application of 4400 Computer Drive. We have a discussion of trail connections between 50 Otis Street and the abutting town property. We have a continued public hearing for site plan review application at 1400 West Park Drive. And we have a discussion and possible approval for site plan review requirements relative to outdoor seating for restaurants. And we have a master plan update. So we will start with the continued public hearing for 4400 Computer Drive. Bob, why don't you start, summarize where we're at, and then I'll turn to Jim for any comments and the board for questions. Yeah, you can sit, stand.
No, I don't want to stand.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, John Perry's here. Robert Buckley, Raymond Bronstein, I have John Perry, our site civil from Langen. Since the last time we were before the board, we actually, I'll update the board, what we did, we met, a number of the board members were there too, I believe, on site with some residents in the abutting area last week to do a site walk to look at where we're proposing to put the sound wall as well as the other fencing to screen both sound or to attenuate sound and also to handle the lights from the vehicles. We had a mock-up to show the minimum height of 12 feet, so that there would be a sense of comparison, what people could identify with. And it was interesting, while we were there, I believe it started at 7 and went to about 8. I think there were 23 trucks that left the site while we were standing there from the NFI depot that is in the rear. So when we put in a report that there were 260 trucks a day, I don't think that's an exaggeration. And we're going to reduce traffic significantly.
Bob, can you use the mic even I'm having trouble?
Oh, I'm sorry. Some towns, they complain you put it too close. So We have subsequently provided the staff and the board, I assume, with, for public consumption, a summary that was prepared by our sound acoustical engineers, Ostergaard, which laid out the parameters of what they are going to be looking at and what their recommendations were based upon the data provided. And I think that if you read it, you'll see that they concur with our location. The general consensus is that they don't envision any impact based upon what we're putting there. It's certainly going to be better than what exists there today. They are out there now collecting the information with the sound monitoring. So we'll have a baseline for purposes of comparison as the system, as the site is operational. One of the things that was discussed on site and that we've agreed to, there were two things: is post-monitoring after we're in operation within a window of time that the board or the town can request that the post-monitoring occur to verify compliance, and that will be a condition that we've agreed to. And the other is that the sound attenuation wall in particular would be installed as early in the construction process as possible, and we're agreeable to that. I think that would probably occur sometime shortly after site grading. So that would help mitigate any construction activity or noise that emanates from the construction activity. For point of reference on the overhead, the sound attenuation wall is indicated in red, where we try to wrap it around the corner as the vehicles come in that long straightaway and make the corner. So from the point of that corner to the loading dock, we've done that will be the minimum 12-foot high sound attenuation wall. The blue will be a visual blockade or something to mitigate any light emissions that may emanate from vehicles coming and going into the site. The rear parking lot, which we discussed on site, is where the vans will be parked in the evening. There will be no activity overnight there. They're left there overnight and are activated during the day, the next day. So there's no notable traffic down there. And I think there was a sense that one had the sense of dimensions where you could see the natural buffer that will be maintained. There was also some discussion about looking at potential vegetation as needed to mitigate maybe some of the appearance of the wall. We will rely on the recommendation of the acoustical engineers as to what the material should be, and we will also be responsible for maintaining that in a suitable condition, not only for the abutting property owners if they can see it, but also for our employees. It's an amenity that will affect our visual impact also. But we're waiting to hear what they recommend for the material, because they're going to focus on the type of sound we're trying to mitigate, and there's certain, types of materials that are better than others. So we would agree to a condition to provide the town, the board, with a designed template of, once we receive from the sound engineer, what the recommended materials would be. But they would be cued and tied to what they discover in the field and what the proposed activity on site would be in terms of what we're trying to mitigate or attenuate. Other than that, I think that there's been one minor revision to the plans to show where during demolition and construction where we would have the material stored and crushed, and that will be denoted on the plans. And beyond that, I think those were the changes.
Thanks, Bob. Jim, do you want to summarize any outstanding issues that we have, and then we can turn to the board for questions?
No, but I did want to ask a couple questions of Bob and the applicant.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Jim.
So Bob, in a general fashion, can you tell us where on this plan the demolition material will be stored and any reprocessing?
Yeah, I have another plan too, if you want me to pull it up, but generally it's going to be in the southwestern parking lot, the existing parking lot. Why don't I show you on the plan?
That would be great.
Switching over here, this is our overall erosion control plan that also has some demolition notes on it, and we would propose for that to occur in southwestern parking lot here. So this stockpile area would be where we would stockpile the crushed materials from the building, and we have notes on here. Let me see. I wish I had my mouse. That right here, this parking area will remain paved while the building material and crushing processing occurs, so that there's limited chance for any sort of erosion issues out there. And there's also another note here about general phasing that we added in here. The second sentence in this statement here is more of a broad statement for the whole site, really. Contractor shall implement a phased approach to pavement demolition, reclamation, and site stabilization in order to minimize land disturbance and erosion potential of the site. So not just necessarily in that parking lot there. So obviously erosion control is always kind of a fluid motion as the site's being worked, and grading's being worked as well. We've definitely cited that stockpile in an appropriate location outside of any environmental buffer areas.
So I would want to note that in the decision that those are the areas that your operation for stockpiling and reprocessing can only occur.
Yes,
So
that's,
they wouldn't occur outside that area.
yeah, that's fine. And we can issue this, this plan to this revised plan, so it can be part of the decision.
Yeah, we'll certainly cite the plan in the decision, but I think Jim wants to go a little further and make that a condition of approval.
Sure.
Jim, you'll have some language to circulate on that before the next.
In the site plan, yes, I will. Also, as you know, as the board knows, we distributed a draft of the site plan for our next meeting to discuss for approval. Bob did a great job in preparing his proposed conditions. I don't know if you're prepared to take any comments on that.
Sure. Welcome the comments. One thing I forgot to bring up, which I believe came from Jim through the board, with respect to the vehicles, to make sure that the excise tax is associated with the town of Westborough. So we did put a condition, or suggest a condition that would be applicable. So all vehicles that designate this as their home base of operation would be registered for purposes of excise tax to the town of Westborough.
Yeah, I just wonder if we could put some type of minimum on that. Do we have an expectation of how many vehicles we're talking about?
I will look at that. From a standpoint, I don't necessarily have a problem. I don't know how they calculate the excise tax. So I know there's a state formula and how that's done,
Sure.
but based on value, but
I'm just saying a minimum number of vehicles. I'm
Oh,
not saying a
okay.
minimum,
Oh, okay.
I mean, obviously, the excise tax varies based on the age and make and
I think-
model, but I just don't want, a claim
I
down the
think the way
road
to
that,
probably handle that is anticipated, which approximate no less than X. We'll figure out that.
I just don't want to find out down the road that 90% of the vehicles are claiming to have a principal place of operation somewhere else.
Legitimate point.
All right, so, Jim, did you have another question?
Yes. Bob, you and I have talked about this previously. This is regarding condition 10 in the proposed site plan approval. This has to do with the plan for dealing with the Northeast Quadrant and public infrastructure study. And the way that you have proposed it is that you would contribute a sum to the town of $15,000 to conduct the study as part of our master plan by VHB. two things. First of all, that would require us to amend our master plan with our consultant. Our consultant has not agreed to that work. Secondly, it would require that we abide by any bidding laws if that's necessary, if the consultant did not accept that work. And in the past, and as one of your more recent projects that we worked on, the applicant conducted this study to deliver it to the town prior to occupancy. And I think that that would be a preferable option for the town, would be to have the applicant conduct that study with a scope that was acceptable to the town, and that study be completed prior to occupancy.
Yeah, conceptually, we don't have a problem with that. I think what we may want to do, I frankly don't know what the cost of such a study would be. We estimated based upon the information what we put in the document, but what I would suggest to the board, if it's agreeable, is to, if we negotiate or we contract, that it would be within a range, and maybe, I don't know if it's 15 or 20 or 25, but in that range, because we should work out the scope, and that dictates the value and the cost.
Yeah, I think there's another issue that if you give it to the town, it goes into the mitigation stabilization fund, and in order for us to spend it, we would have to go to town meeting.
Okay.
So that would make it much more difficult than if you just contract with
Understood. So we'll address it that way, and what, not knowing what the scope will be and what the cost is, maybe we'll put in, as we did in the prior, not to exceed an amount, and we put a figure in here that, that was our initial estimate. My initial response is probably going to be a little more than that, based upon some of the checking that we've done, but we'll work that out, and that would be a condition for occupancy.
Okay, so why don't we talk about it in the next day or two?
Yep.
That'd be great.
If you could think about some of the scope, what you'd like to see, we could start drafting the scope of that.
Okay, I'll reach out to my departments.
Yep.
Jim, did you have anything else?
No.
Why don't we turn to the board for questions? Does anybody on the board have any questions for the applicant?
This is purely an information question. How long do you think it's going to take you to do the demo and then build the building?
Well, we talked about that on site. A few things have to occur. We have to relocate the tenant, which we envision to start as soon as we have the approval from the board. And then we're probably talking 6 months for the demo. And if my client, if I go off the reservation, let me know. So then we would start site work, which is probably another 3 to 4 months, depending upon conditions, whether we're in winter conditions. So the sooner we get the approval, the sooner we can seriously relocate the tenant, and then the demo we would try to do as quickly as possible.
You said about 18 months, was it?
Yeah, approximately 18 months, bearing in mind that a lot of that will be internal work. The shell will be up a lot sooner than that. The construction cycle would be about 18 months.
Now, that's the part I was concerned about as far as the neighbors go.
Right.
And how long the construction was going to take.
Yeah, and we talked extensively on site about that. That's why we would commit that once we have the schedule done, Jim and I could talk about this. Maybe we should have what is called a construction schedule plan or a summary provided. It could be updated periodically, so you'll know if someone calls where we are and what has to be done. But also that we would get the sound attenuation wall up as soon as possible, which probably is after demo and after site work, because you'd have to put the utilities, the drainage in, and then as you're constructing, there's no reason not to put the wall up at that point. So, and we actually talked about that in terms of hours of operation. There's a balance. Do you want to consolidate it and work fast, or extrapolate it and work a little slower? So we can work on that.
Yeah, that you can work with Jim on that aspect. That was my only question.
So, Jim, we had another letter come in today from a resident. I know it's fairly late, so I was hoping you could circulate that to the board and to Bob Buckley. It was regarding a potential trail easement that I've raised the issue before. I realize you're offering financial compensation to the town, but I'm just not sure that everyone's in agreement on that yet. And I don't know if it would make sense for us to sit down and have a work session on that to see if we can come up with another solution. I'm still trying to grasp the rationale for not giving us the easement. I've heard that the neighbors are against it, but I've yet to hear a neighbor
We also have
speak in one of these
security
meetings
issues
or-
and people on site.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Bob, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry?
You have
Oh. We also have security issues, people on site, truck traffic, the parking issues, and, but I'd be happy to sit down and try to work
Yeah, I
that.
just would like to see if there's another option there that would, be more satisfactory to the town, because that charm bracelet is an important project to the town. It's been, decades in the making, and I think this would be an important link for that. And so I don't want to give up hope that we can come to an agreement on that. And so I think that letter from the resident should be entered into the record and cited in the,
That letter may be read into the record in the public hearing later.
yeah, I think we should circulate it to Bob and maybe get a formal response to it too. And I don't want to surprise you with it, so we can introduce it at the next meeting if, let's
Just got it this afternoon at 4:30, so sorry, Bob.
So,
Chairman, if I could, if you could enter it into the record, that would be fine tonight. But I'd rather, given the construction season and some of the issues to get moving with respect to the tenant, we were hoping that at the next meeting would pretty much be done, and hopefully you'd make your decision. So,
well, I would agree with that goal. And I don't know if we need to read that letter into the record or not, then,
Could it not just be appended as an exhibit?
You want to do that?
yeah, I think we can append it. We're supposed to have things in by Thursday before the meeting, and the board hasn't even seen it yet, so.
well, you can enter it, we can look at it, and so when we meet, we'll be in a position to respond.
Yeah, I think we'll circulate it to you and the board and maybe try and do a work session to come up with a solution on it, so that, by the next meeting, we can have some draft language to propose to the
Sure.
board. And whether it be the language that's already in the draft or some other solution.
So I'll coordinate with Jim, setting up a meeting to perhaps come out here and sit down.
So maybe we could, I don't know if anyone else on the board, we could have up to 2 members participate in that work session. If anyone else on the board is interested in, I know I would like to do it, so.
Work on it with you, Mark.
Okay, Tim, thanks. So we'll circulate some times and see if we can have
Sure.
a work session and possibly invite someone from the land trust to attend, since they've been instrumental in the charm bracelet development, and possibly somebody from conservation as well, I think might be good to have.
Happy to do it.
I know there's an existing conservation restriction up there. I just want to make sure that I understand the limitations of that as well. So let's get a date on the schedule in the near future so that we can get this ironed out and hopefully
Happy to do it.
involved in time to give you a decision on July 6th. The other thing that I think is outstanding, I read through the letter from Ostergaard, which contained quite a few I don't knows, and we don't have the information yet. So I guess I would ask, when is that final sound study going to be ready and circulated to not just us, but to the abutters, so that we can entertain questions on that with all the information?
Should have that shortly.
Yes, the consultant, Ostergaard, has monitored the site presently, deployed them last week. They need to get ambient baseline data. And within a few weeks, we'll have that sound study completed.
And And that'll include a recommendation on the materials and aesthetic of the wall? Sound barrier, I should say.
What I would suggest, if I could through the chair, is that we would be agreeable to a condition that we can't pull a building permit until we have closure finished. So we provide that we would provide you with the detail of what the recommendation of the Austin consultant is in the material.
Well, I guess I'm really psyched about closing the public hearing until until the abutters have had a chance to see that and comment on it. So I would suggest that if we could get that in time to circulate it.
We can get the use of detail and material provided as soon as possible.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Any comments from other town departments? Patrick, go ahead. Just that name and address for the record. I know who you are.
Patrick Welch, 15 Chauncey Circle, Select Board Representative. So just a question, great to hear that we're doing the sound study, but I am curious as to whether or not the appropriateness of the height of the wall at 12 feet, considering that these trucks are well over 13 feet. I'm not sure the make of the truck, but the exhaust system on many of these trucks extends well above the height of the truck. Just wondering if that's part of what's being studied, is part of it is the heights of these trucks and where the exhaust and then.
So Patrick, we talked about that a little at the site visit, and first of all, the headlights are not higher than 12 feet.
Yeah.
And second of all, because of the elevation of the site, the homes are looking up. So when you have a wall and the site view is going up like that, I know that's very technical explanation, but the angle of view is actually takes it above the.
Yeah, I was more worried about the sound, but I apologize, I couldn't make that visit.
Yeah.
So it's good. It sounds like you guys have talked about it, and it's perhaps part of the study
I
itself.
think the conclusion is that, there's not going to be 0 decibels from this site, but it's going to be much better than what's there.
Sure.
And that's what their sound engineer had summarized, but again, we need the final sound report, and we'll make sure you get a copy on that.
Terrific, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other town departments? Okay, any members of the public that care to ask questions? Just step to the mic and name and address.
Joe Breen, 14 Smith Street in Westborough. Thank you, board. I thank the applicant also. Regarding the sound wall, which we talked about last week on site, if the applicant could provide the technical document of the sound study that would be available to the board and the public before, as you said, it's still an open forum for the sound wall. The neighbors would appreciate that, and so we can analyze the study and just to make sure that it's somewhat vetted with the board and the public.
Okay.
And will that occur? Do you know?
Oh, that's what we just asked for. yeah.
Right, I just wanted to just double check that. So, and I know you've talked about the sound study for a month or two now, and that, you said 2 weeks now or longer?
We're certainly going to push tomorrow morning to have it done ASAP.
Great, thank you.
Ken, just name and address.
Mark, can I speak?
Oh, Ken, do you mind waiting 1 second? We got a question for the board.
Yes, sorry. So to Joe's point, I think it's important that we get that study in because, as we stated, if the neighbors don't like what is put in and then they're complaining to the town, then you're going to have to reevaluate the situation and then probably put in a larger wall or do something. So I think it's very important that we get that study in so you guys don't have to rebuild that wall. I think both sides, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
One of my questions, I missed the thing last week. I thought that was tonight. It's
Name and
wrong
address.
information.
Can we
I could have
get
walked
your name
across. Oh, I'm 19 Smith Street. I could have walked across the field. to seeing it. One of the things you're debating the size of the wall, the density of the wall and materials, and I've talked to Joe, who's a highway engineer, about it. My question is, you have a sound study going on right now. Can you extrapolate into November, December, September, October, when you're going to be having hundreds and thousands of trucks in there every night, loading and unloading, the sound levels that are going to come at that time? Also referring to the wall and the fact that at that time of year, behind there, it's all, I mentioned before, deciduous trees, not evergreen. So the leaves are gone. The sound is much louder at that time of year. So you're going to have to do your study, not just for the summertime when everything's muted because of vegetation. You're going to have to do it and extrapolate into what the future sound is going to be in your busy time of year. That's, to me, is very important.
Yeah.
And like Peter said, why build a cheap wall to get through there for a couple of bucks that you might have to rebuild in the future?
Well, I don't think the applicant's suggesting that they build a cheap wall.
Well, no, I mean, but I'm sorry, I
applicants-
roughened up what he just said, a wall that's not sufficient.
Well, I think the applicant has engaged an expert in
Yeah.
sound attenuation to make a recommendation on the wall with an expectation of a decibel level after the installation of the wall, decibel level for the abutters, for the residential abutters.
For all seasons.
So I think the point we've made last week, and again, you weren't there, but the applicant's committed to a review of this after 18 months that would include the period from November 1st to January 1st,
Okay.
which is their peak season, and would give us, at the town and the abutters, a chance to revisit the effectiveness of that solution and whether further sound attenuation or light attenuation is necessary.
Okay.
So I think that, again, not to speak for the applicant, but I think they've made a commitment there that they're going to address this and, to everyone. Again, I don't know that you're not going to get any sound, but I'm fairly convinced that it's going to be a substantial improvement over what you have now. Again, the proof is in the pudding, right? Until it's installed and functioning, we won't know 100% for sure if it's working the way we hope, right? And that's really, I have to be convinced that what they're proposing is going to work, right? But, I've had projects come in here before where I thought it was going to work and it didn't quite work out the way I expected. So at least we have a chance to revisit that within 18 months. Okay?
And I want to check on something else. This has to do with the trucks. I mean, one day a few months ago, I saw two Amazon trucks, one turn around up State Street and another one run across the center circle, taking out one of those hitching posts and leaving it there. Is there some way to tell your truckers that a 13.6 truck will not fit under 12.6 bridge?
Yeah.
I mean, I hear they use an app, they use GPS, and the GPS doesn't say, but they tend to come in off that way, and we can't stop them from using the streets, but they can't get through to that side of town.
So Ken, this is a site plan.
Okay, I just want to let my 2 cents in there.
Not really the planning board's.
When do we debate that, when the bridge gets
Well,
wrecked?
I think there's traffic laws in place, and the police chief would enforce those.
Okay.
You also might want to attend a Board of Select meeting, and they have an open forum at the beginning of their meetings, and you might want to raise it at that point. I know there are a lot of people in the town are concerned about this, so that's one way to voice your opinion about things that you'd like to see taken care of.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond to one of the comments?
Absolutely, Bob, go ahead.
I did not sit in on every meeting, but I sat in on a number of the meetings with the development team, with the sound engineer. In the parameters of the charge to the sound engineer included some of the questions that were raised. Let's make sure we look at it for various times of the year, intensity of traffic, vegetation surrounding the site. Those were all discussed as components that had to be analyzed as part of the study. Because we're as cognizant as the abutters that, as the member indicated, we don't want to be out there adjusting it once it's built. But those were discussed in detail so that they understood the charge.
Can I just say one thing?
Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, so when we were there last week, there were
23.
23 trucks that pulled in when we were there, and they were idling for an extensive period of time. I think overall traffic and noise is going to be improved, definitely from the current situation, but I think it's very important that we take the measures to protect the people on Smith Street. So that's, but it was a lot of noise coming in. We were standing there and truck was going passing. And I think it's important to note we're cutting it from 260 trips a day to 30 non-peak. I know it doesn't speak to the holiday season where more traffic's going to come in, and that's why we're going to have that 18-month study. So I think that's just, I was very pleased with the going to the site and hearing the measures that they were going to take, but let's just make sure they follow through on all that. That's my feeling on that.
Thanks, Pete. Any other comments from the public? Okay. I'll entertain a motion to continue this then.
Mr. Chairman, just before you do that, just so we're all on the same page, I'm going to confer with the team and make sure we get the sound attenuation report to the board as soon as possible. I'm going to look at the issues with respect to the assignment of excise tax to the vehicles and provide an estimate of what we envision the minimum being. And I'll coordinate with Jim setting up a work session to talk about they call it CHAM?
Time bracelet, trail access, yeah.
Remember that one.
Yeah, if we can get those three things ironed out, I think we have a draft that just needs a little tweaking that we can probably look to, assuming everything's ironed out satisfactorily, and we don't, we'll give the public a chance to look at that sound study and comment at the next meeting, and if everything goes smoothly, we might be able to make a decision at the next meeting, but, obviously, no guarantees. Joe, you have your hand up, go ahead.
If the applicant cannot provide the sound study like the day of the meeting or the day before, people need some time. The applicant does have a history of providing documents moments before meetings.
So the next meeting's July 6th. I do not want this on July 4th. I want it, this, for a number of reasons, but I think, again, if we can't get it with a reasonable amount of time to circulate it, then we'll ask for more time on that end. Okay? It's really, the pressure is on them to get it back quickly so that we can get this out to everybody. All right.
Mr. Chairman, I want the record to show, I don't think we've been late with getting stuff in. I hope not, so, in terms of getting.
Again, I don't have that perception. Other people might, but I would agree with that.
Mr. Chair, can I make a motion to continue the public hearing for site plan review of 4400 Computer Drive
To
to July
July
6th?
6th at 6:30, right?
Yes, 6:30 p.m.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? I don't need to do a roll call, so all those in favor, show of hands. That's 5-0 in favor of continuing to July 6th.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. All right, we have another item on the agenda, Bob, for discussion of trail connections between 50 Otis and the abutting town property, which is Hockomock Pond.
I don't think we're in a position to talk about it. I saw it on the agenda, but I am going to stay and listen to your discussion, just so I know
Okay.
what your thinking is.
Okay, well, I was going to suggest maybe we could have a work session on that as well, maybe in conjunction with the
No,
other.
that would be ideal.
Yeah,
That would be ideal.
and I can invite some members of at least one other member of the Hockomock Reuse Committee to that as well.
I mean, for information, my view of it is, if we're going to do something, we do it so I think we put in the decision, you can use the money elsewhere. And I understand you want to talk about the charm bracelet, but I'd rather focus on making something meaningful and complete and enjoyable now rather.
So this is separate from the charm bracelet. This is the
Right.
Otis Street property that when we issued the site plan permit, Amazon and, well, your applicant had indicated that they would support
Absolutely.
the future easements to ensure public access around the pond. And we're just looking for the applicant to do the surveys and tell us where those easements are going to be and get those recorded so that
We're
we.
glad to work with the town and have those discussions, and I think the idea of rolling up our sleeves and doing it that way, it makes a lot of sense.
Right. So we could probably do that in conjunction if Tim's willing to
Yep.
sit through 2 work sessions and save you another trip to.
No, I don't mind coming out.
So I think we don't really need, unless anyone has questions on that, we'll take that issue up at a future meeting and give the board an update on our progress.
You know, but just for the record, I did bring it up with my client this afternoon, and we do have that commitment on the other site, and with this commitment, if we put our heads together, I think we can do something positive.
Right. Well, I'm excited for it. So
Okay, thank you.
let's.
Thank you.
Bob, do you have all the information on when AstraZeneca owned that property and where the original trails went at that particular time?
I do recall sitting with Mr. Robbins, I think I have a plan, a copy of the plan, of plans that were done at some point in time, but I know where Jim is, I'll find it, but
Well, I thought that might help.
yeah,
you, just
yeah, but I do
having-
recall seeing something in connection with that prior project that showed
Yeah.
the location of the trail system as proposed. And we also talked about linking it, there's a,
Yeah, for the board's information,
right.
I actually spoke with his client today on the phone about this and talked about a couple potential locations where the trail might connect to Hockomock Pond.
Yeah, because I mean, it's sort of a waste of everyone's time if Bob comes in with these easements and then it has nothing to do with where
No, no.
actually the trail would go.
Right.
So I'm
Well, that's, I
just
think,
trying
the point of a
to
work
shortcut those things and have him have the information on things that we had done before.
Right.
Right.
So that hopefully we can match these all up together.
Good.
be happy to help. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Bob. Okay. So next item on the agenda is a continued public hearing for the site plan review application of 1400 West Park Drive. If you could just name and everything for the record.
Good evening, members of the board, Chair. I'm Howard Mosier from VHB.
Hi, Howard. So, Jim, I'm going to turn it to you to summarize the outstanding issues on this, and then we'll get a response from the applicant, and then turn to the board for questions, and then the public.
Sure. At our last meeting, we talked about a few things, mostly centered around traffic, and our consultant here this evening from McMahon Associates, Jeffrey, is here to provide his summary findings. And we also talked about mitigation. We began discussing what the planning board was thinking in terms of the applicant's contribution.
Boulevard in Taunton, Massachusetts. So we were last here on May 25th and talked about the findings relative to the 1400 West Park Drive project. So what we had done was provided peer review for the applicant's traffic study. And at that time, we did not have the hard copies of the material with sufficient time to provide a formal review. But the applicant did provide initial responses, so we were able to take that feedback. So once the information did come in, we were able to formalize it and put that information so that it could be discussed here this evening by you and also received by the applicant as well. So what the applicant provided to us was a response to comments letter that we had provided in our initial peer review, and also a revised intersection site distance plan that was included as part of the initial package. So those were the two documents that we used as part of our second response to comments. So the first, I'll start with the intersection site distance plan. So we had a previous comment from the initial plan that requested some additional information in terms of the site distance that was on the plan. We had done, as part of our review, done a speed study, and we requested that the intersection site distance information be updated relative to the information that McMahon provided as part of the initial peer review. So that information was provided to us and is to our satisfaction. The second piece was the response to comments relative to the size of the proposed development and also the amount of trips that would be generated as part of the development compared to what was previously seen by the town and was previously approved as part of the November 2020 traffic impact assessment. So the applicant did provide a response to our comments, and what we found was that given the difference in the size of the facility and also type of the facility, that there would be more trips generated on a daily and presumably peak hour basis under this new site program than what was approved previously. So we requested that the applicant provide a revised capacity analysis, or at least some sort of initial cursory review to outline the impact of this potential increase on the surrounding roadway network and what that would mean in terms of providing mitigation to the town as part of this development. So our main concern is on the how that manifests itself to two intersections, the East Main Street and Flanders Road intersection, and also the Flanders Road and Connector Road intersection. McMahon had previously provided an assessment of the Flanders Road segment that included those two intersections back on January 29th. So that assessment concluded that there could be mitigation measures instituted at those two locations due to a couple of things, due to the existing operations at those intersections being at level of service F on an A through F scale basis, and also that both intersections meet the traffic signal warrants based on the manual on uniform traffic control devices as set forth by Federal Highway Association. So those traffic signal warrants were based on counts that were done previously pre-COVID. Understandably, traffic has decreased over that time. So as part of our recommendation, we included that traffic counts be included post-occupancy, and that the evaluation of the traffic signal warrant at that time be included, and that there would be some possibility of a monetary contribution on behalf of the applicant to install the traffic signal at that time should it be warranted. In the meantime, we did include some potential mitigation measures, mostly from a geometric and traffic monitoring side, that could be installed to positively impact both capacity and safety within the study area. So if traffic can't be mitigated in terms of volume capacity, at least from a safety perspective, the town could have some sort of level of comfort in knowing that existing geometric deficiencies could be kind of managed as part of this project. So that's the genesis of our review. I'd be happy to let the applicant respond or take any questions from the board at this time.
Any response to that, Howard?
I don't know if you have any questions.
Anybody have a question?
So I would say, I don't know if there was a second comment letter that you're referencing.
Okay.
So we don't have a receipt of a second comment letter, but as you know, at the last planning board meeting, we spent a considerable time about the matters of incremental traffic and things of that nature. And I believe in possession of the board is an offer of a mitigation package. Mr. Robbins could read the appropriate details, but would address the design of a signal, full design of a signal at East, First, and Flanders, and as well if there's any leftover monies that could be applied to other mitigation projects at the discretion of the town.
Right. So just to summarize, Hazel and I and Jim had what I would term a successful work session where we came to an agreement on an amount of $137,500, a portion of which would be used towards the 100% build design of a traffic solution at the end of East Main Street, or at the end of Flanders Road and East Main Street. And any remaining portion would then be go into the mitigation stabilization fund for use by the town and earmarked for traffic improvements in that area. That would enable us to go to the state, hopefully, and obtain some grant money and offer some matching funds to a significant solution there, which I think is what we're hoping to achieve. So that was certainly successful, and we got a letter, an email today that was circulated. I hope everyone had a chance to read that. There was also information in responding to the IUM, which I think was positive news. The numbers seem to be manageable for the town, but not saying there won't be any impact on emergency services, but they seem to be somewhat less than we had feared. So that was good news.
Yeah, I was going to introduce that in the ambulance topic for the record, that we did a deep analysis of operations at their Foxborough facility, which was the most analogous facility to being proposed in Westborough. The conclusion of the analysis is that 13 annual EMS trips were anticipated, so just north of 1 per month,
Yeah.
which was under the amount that I had originally thought, 3 to 7.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's much less.
Much less. Thank you.
So any other questions? Outstanding, Jim, anything from you?
I have nothing. Thank you to Jeff for coming to here tonight from McMahon. Thank you.
Okay. Anything from other town departments? Anything from the public? Patrick, anything? No.
I did, excuse me, Mr. Chair, I had one more matter that Mr. Robbins asked me to read into the notes, was that in our photometric study of the lighting,
Yes.
as required under the town's rules, we conducted a photometric study. And the conclusion of that study is we had a small amount of spill on the eastern property line near the detention basin, where the road and the sidewalk are closest to the property line. It doesn't meet the 0.0, but it's 0.2, 0.3 foot candles, very little on a property line with no abutting neighbor. It would be the detention basin. And we have requested for a small amount of relief there, and we wanted it read into the record for the planning board.
Sure. I think that was brought up at a previous meeting, too, so it's not a surprise. Does anybody have questions on that?
Just a comment. I'm sorry, did you have a question? Oh,
I had
just a
another
comment.
question.
The board has done this before, so when you have a site that's worded like this, and the amount of light cast on the parking lot reaches the area off of the pavement, we require that there be at least 1 foot candle as you reach the edge of the parking lot. But when the parking lot is so close to their property line, and in an area that's actually, in this case, facing the highway, you're going to get more casting of light onto the property from the headlights than you are from this site. So it's not unusual. This request, I think, is very reasonable, and the board has done this before.
Okay. Tim, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question of the applicant, not specifically related to the site plan review, but the overall licensing required by the state. And if I saw it in the public record to try to find out what the timetable was for that review and couldn't find any information. That's by the Public Health Council and the licensure of the facility, which I believe is relevant just to the build schedule that you had. So unable to find anything in the public record, and was just curious as a member of this board about that timetable, if you had any information.
Yeah, I'll introduce Ms. Robin Berry from Mass General Brigham. She can address that comment.
All right, thank you.
Hi, do I need to come up or can I just do from here?
No, just speak loudly.
Okay. Robin Berry, Director of Real Estate at Mass General Brigham, and you're absolutely right, we're working through that process with the state. We were very, very hopeful that we would be able to start construction in August based on coming through that process. We now anticipate it will be a bit delayed. We're still optimistic that it will be this fall, but we're still trying to sort through exactly what that means in terms of our construction start schedule. We know that it's not going to be August at this point. It's out to, best case it'll be in the fall, and we're sort of doing our best to make sure that's the case. But to a certain extent, it's out of our hands. Working with the state.
Could I ask that you just keep the board warmed as it goes on the docket? Because I was, going through PDFs and trying to find some.
Happy.
That would be great.
As we know, right?
Yeah, right. Thank you. Thank you for that.
We're clearer for all of us.
Any other questions? So I think at this point, the board will instruct Jim to prepare a draft site plan approval for circulation to the applicant and to the board. in time, with sufficient time that we have a chance to review and potentially respond for the July 6th meeting.
Yes,
We'll leave the public hearing open
yes.
until
Best to do that.
time, just in case we need to introduce any new information. But I think we've got, virtually everything ironed out. There's no outstanding engineering, right?
Well, the town engineer, there is still engineering comments going back and forth, but I don't think it's unusual for you to grant a site plan approval with some of the engineering work to still be completed. What you can do is, what I was preparing to do, was to write a condition that says they can't have a building permit until all of the engineering work has been resolved, and that's typical. I'm sure Howard would say that. This.
I think the point I'm saying is, let's get a draft out there so that they can agree with the language and,
Yeah, I thought you meant the site engineering work.
Well, just in general, there's going to be some conditions on the,
Sure.
I want to make sure the applicant has a chance to review.
Did you want to discuss the mitigation?
Well, I thought we did that in the work session. I think the specific language of the mitigation, I need you to propose that first before.
Okay, so Robin, I'll work with you with the timing of that mitigation. Okay. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's going to be, I guess, triggers for when that mitigation will be
That's the key.
due, and we're just trying to figure out, what your expectations are on that and what the board's expectations are on that, and I don't think we're too far off on that, so I want to see what the
Hopefully the
language.
construction doesn't last too long, that we have lots of schedule to
Yeah,
discuss.
I think, from my standpoint, I'd like to see the design of that intersection move along quickly, and not, and the remaining mitigation could be paid out at a later date, but I would like to see that move along quickly if possible. So again, it's I have to see the language that Jim proposes, and, I think you need to see that as well. So let's get that circulated so you have a chance to respond.
I mean, we had some discussions where I think that the important thing is that the work that we'd like to get done moves forward, but at the same time that you get your own construction schedule, work forward and get into the building yourselves. So we're all on the same page on this, and it's just a matter of working through so that we've got some measurable, place marks where things get done, which is normally the way you want to do things anyway, so that by X
Yeah, we'll look
time-
forward to seeing the
Yeah.
specific conditions and
Yeah.
working on it,
And I
understanding
think,
the goals.
Yeah, I don't know, Christie had a discussion with Robin maybe today, Jim did, so I think they're aware of the kind of direction in which we were looking to go.
Glad to hear that, thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right, so Jim, you'll prepare a draft, and other than that, I think we can continue the public hearing.
Want a complete motion this time?
Sure.
Do you have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to continue the public hearing for site plan review of the application for 1400 West Park Drive to July 6th at 6:30 PM.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, that's a show of hands again. That's 5-0 in favor. We'll see you in July. Have a great Independence Day.
Thank you.
Happy 4th.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Jeffrey.
So, next item on the agenda was a discussion and possible approval for site plan review requirements relative to outdoor seating for restaurants. I'm not sure if this is a placeholder, if we have a progress. I'll let Fred address that.
And today's the 15th, and I guess they haven't passed the bill yet.
Well, I think it's been, Fred Lenaro, Building Commissioner, I think I got an update from Zach, our Economic Development Coordinator, and I believe that it has passed, but they have to reconcile because there were some amendments. So it's gone to, the way he explains it to me, it's gone to a committee now to reconcile between the House and the Senate differences between the bills. One of the proposals was to extend it, if I understood it correctly, to April of '22. Which Harry's is the only one that actually used the seating throughout the winter, believe it or not. So they would gain benefit, albeit I will say, I have a meeting with the owner of the property at Harry's, myself and the Economic Development Coordinator, so he wants to expand his seating permanently. So this raises the question that we've started with, that we have at least one restaurant that wants to go forward permanently with this. So the issue I'm going to have, and the board will have to address, is that the minimum fee is $1,000 for these type of site plans. So I don't know what the flavor of the board is. We may be able to do that as a limited, where it goes into staff and it doesn't go in front of the full board, but it's still the fee. I don't know what we do with the fees and what the recommendation from the board will be with that stuff. I think we'll get some pushback on this, but.
Well, I think the original proposal was, waiving fees for temporary seating, but any permanent seating, I think, would require us to reconsider fees as a whole, and I'm not sure the board's ready to do that. I think it's one thing
That's
to
fine.
waive it for a temporary solution. It's another thing, to waive it for a permanent change. Again, I want to streamline this process for the rest of the year for affected business owners, but I'm not suggesting that we circumvent the entire site plan process permanently. That doesn't seem appropriate to me, at least.
That's fine, but I'll point out again that with that particular landowner, that particular restaurant, he's going to have a lot of pushback because there's probably virtually no site plan information out there now. And he's blocked off parking spots now that he thinks that when he goes to a permanent solution, it doesn't affect his parking. So without some kind of engineering relative to.
Well, he has a recourse on that, and that's ZBA, right? So it's not our, we can't grant him relief from current, we can grant him temporary relief from certain aspects. I think that's within our authority. My hope was that the state legislation would pass. I don't think today's the real deadline. I think August 29th is the real deadline.
August 15th.
Because right now, the governor's order is in effect through August 29th.
Oh, through 15.
But my understanding is that unless it doesn't get reconciled and signed by the governor, I assume that'll go forward, and it sounds like. So that it won't be an issue now. What'll happen, though, is if this particular restaurant does want to go forward as a permanent fix, all the boards, if they want the engineering, I want to prep our customer base that they will have to go through the whole gyration, which is going to cost them some significant money to do engineering.
Yeah, so I would be amenable to granting them temporary relief longer than December 1st to give them time to develop the proper site plan and proper, accumulate the necessary funds to pay, but.
Yeah, but do they need relief? I mean, are they planning?
No. They wouldn't necessarily, I'm sorry, they may not necessarily need relief from anything, but what's going to kick in is they're actually going to have to hire an engineer, come up with real surveys.
That's the cost of doing business. I don't know how we can give them relief, permanent relief from that obligation. I don't know.
So I had
we have that authority.
a context question for Fred, because I don't know. Did this matter come before the board? Meaning the ability for restaurants to just provide temporary seating?
No,
it didn't have to.
Go ahead, Fred.
No, my apologies.
No, that was a governor's order.
Right.
So the governor's order expires today, but the order for temporary seating.
I'm aware of all that. Mine goes more to the structures themselves and whether all of the structure, whether you've provided any kind of evaluation or permitting of the structures that went up at any of the restaurants.
Well, the only structures were basically temporary barriers and/or tents.
Tents.
Or a combination thereof. So that what we did is we did permit it, but only as temporary structures, so nothing was done on a permit basis.
Permanent basis, right.
Correct.
So as any of these restaurants elect to go to establish structures as permanent, then they would have to go through the formal process, right?
Well, when we're speaking structures, they're more, in almost all cases, they took up parking. So they basically put the seating out in the parking. and there wasn't anything, even if they go forward, for instance, I hate to keep using this, but Harry's would probably just come up with more permanent barriers, but I don't think they'd ever, well, they might construct something, but I just want to be clear that when I tell these customers and they start screaming at me, that they're going to have to do a real survey, and they're going to have to look at the real engineering, like,
Yeah, I don't think we have a way around that, though. We don't have the authority to, I mean, that would require town meeting approval to give them, to change the rules, right?
well, it really comes down to the extent of information that the board will be looking for when they look at these.
Well, there's a parking requirement built into the bylaws, right?
True.
So if they don't meet the parking requirement, I mean, they have to demonstrate that they're going to meet the parking requirement.
Right.
And relief from the parking requirement would require changing the bylaws or a variance, which neither one is within our authority.
So prior to COVID, were there any rules or laws, bylaws affecting a restaurant that wanted to put up temporary seating in the summer?
It was because it was the parking.
Well, I understand
Well,
the
so-
parking
Yeah.
covenants, and then I was told they don't apply to most of the restaurants downtown. So the Central House doesn't, right?
There's no parking
Right.
requirements in the downtown.
So I'm talking more about the structures than the parking. I understand they're taking up parking space, so that's the only constraint on doing something on a more permanent basis.
Well, part of it is, to your point, if I may, some of it was the ABCC, so that was waived during COVID, so they didn't have to go through that process. When you alter a restaurant serving alcohol, or any facility serving alcohol.
And that was heavily debated at the state. I want to stay with the structure and the land, not the alcohol rules. I'm talking about the matters that would be before the town or this board.
Well, you'd have to go for site plan approval. I mean, if you're
Okay,
trying
well,
to-
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it'd be standard site plan approval.
A former restaurant that wanted to have temporary seating outside in the summer would have to apply for site plan approval.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, no, not necessarily.
Depending on the temporary, what you mean by temporary.
So the trigger here is the parking. That was the trigger on the site plan. It was either in addition to the structure, which we haven't had that many restaurants do additions. As a matter of fact, I don't know that we've had one since I've been in town. So if the structure triggered the site plan, or in this case, parking, so the alteration of the parking is what, in all 12 cases, would trigger the possibility of either limited or a full site plan review. Because the structures, at least on a temporary basis, until I get somebody that actually wants to apply for a permanent change, I don't know where they would put the seating. But if the seating flows into the parking lot, that's what triggers the site plan.
And it's irrelevant whether it's a temporary structure or a permanent structure
That is
because it's
correct.
taking up the parking. Period.
If it exceeds into the parking. So
thank
the
you.
one exception to that was Tavolino's. Tavolino's actually had a patio area. The reason it wouldn't have to come to you is because they were, say, had 50 spots allowed, or 20, I don't know what the number was, but say 20. They expanded it to, say, 50 seats, but they expanded it with an existing patio area. So Tavolino's with one exception where they wouldn't have to come in front of you to expand their permanent seating. They'd have to go through the other process.
ABCC and
Yes.
control of the alcohol.
Yes.
Yeah, I know, because
Was there anything written into, I think that's fine, okay.
What's going to happen as far as the temporary thing? I mean, as far as how you're going to enforce one way or another. So in other words, at this point, we're looking to the fact that this temporary outdoor seating runs through the end of August?
Well,
Or will run through?
if assuming that the legislation passes, this conversation is sort of moot,
Right.
sort of. But as it stands today, it's 60 days after today.
Okay, so that's
It
the middle of
expires on
August.
August 15th or midnight of August 14th.
Okay.
And actually, technically, it would then be, it sounds strange, but it'd almost be a police matter, because then they'd be not in compliance with ABCC. They'd be not in compliance with their alcohol, more so than anything, because all we did is issue a temporary structure permit.
So that we, as a town, could not allow them to continue beyond that point?
Technically, that is correct. And as I said, hopefully that legislation will be worked. It sounds like it's getting there. so it may not be a point. My concern more is that, and I guess it sounds weird, we don't usually have like 10 or 11, and I don't know they will, restaurants coming to us for site plan review. It's be an unusual situation.
Another question then, so really the state, if the state doesn't give, instructions to the Alcohol Beverage Commission, could we continue allowing this temporary seating with no alcohol being served on the patios?
No.
No?
Now, my understanding is once the establishment sells alcohol, they're under the jurisdiction of the ABCC. I'm not an expert in that field, I won't claim to be, but my understanding is any alteration would have to go through their
So
process.
it wouldn't matter, so if they don't get relief from the state on the alcohol issue, then they're gonna, so.
Then it would cease as of August.
Let me ask you again,
14th
then, would a letter from the board to our state reps and senator have any?
Select Board's already done that. They've already sent.
Selectmen sent one.
Yeah, they've already sent a letter of support and things. So I believe the legislation's passed. It's just they haven't reconciled the Senate with the House's amendments.
I'm fairly confident that they'll resolve it.
I think so. If both boards have passed, I think it's just some of the changes were, again, extending it past what was originally proposed by Governor Baker, because he was initially going to expand it to, I think, November 29th, but don't quote me on that date, somewhere in November. So I think they've looked to expand it past that. I just
Have any situation where one restaurant gets a privilege or something
Preferential
over
treatment.
another, yeah.
I just don't think
And
we
so
have,
that's,
I don't
you
think
know,
we have the authority to grant a
Right.
permanent solution there. That would be either ZBA or we would have to change the bylaws, which would require.
Well, I think it's important that, any restaurant owner in town is aware of the fact that, what your constraints are based on what the present laws are, so that we don't have a lot of people saying, well, they're going to do this, or they're going to do that, or they're going to do this. So that I think it is important that maybe after the legislation goes out, or after the legislation is finally passed by the state, which I'm pretty confident myself that it will pass, that perhaps something can go out from the building department or somewhere, just notifying the restaurants we have had in town that have had this outdoor parking as to when it's going to expire, and if they wish to continue this, what the requirements will be under the town law and the state
We've been
law.
trying to have that conversation ongoing, correct?
Well, so the Economic Development Corner has actually already sent out that information. So we've already
Okay,
notified them
good.
that,
All right.
as of certain dates, and we're hoping the legislation will pass, but if it didn't, blah, blah, blah. And we've also tried to inform them, and we'll continue to do this, if they want to do this permanently, they then have to go through a much longer, drawn-out process.
So, Jim, to what extent do we have, through waivers, to grant them relief on this? I mean,
So you can grant relief from any of your procedures, and we have a site plan review handbook that everyone has to read and comply with. So if you were to propose a restaurant today, and you needed a site plan review, because you're going to have 5 or more parking spaces, or 2,000 or more square feet of addition, you'd have to comply with the requirements of the handbook, one of which is fees, one of the things that Fred talked about. You have
we
to
have the authority to waive.
the fee. You have the authority to waive any of the requirements in the handbook, which includes the standards for plans being submitted. Engineered plan with a survey, topography, all of the things that we would normally ask for in a site plan.
Well, that's kind of my point. I'm sorry.
Okay, but we don't have the authority to waive parking.
No, that's, if it's, the threshold is 5 parking spaces, which is required by zoning. And you don't have the authority to waive zoning.
You could encourage them that they could apply for a site plan and ask for waivers on certain things, right?
That's fine.
And we would consider those waivers on an individual basis. And if it meant that, they wanted us to waive a complete engineering, but they have to at least demonstrate to the satisfaction of the board that they're complying with zoning.
But we can't waive parking, right?
You can't wait the actual requirement of apartment, albeit, so that's a good suggestion, Mark, I appreciate that. Owners like Harry's will want to know that they could request waivers. rather
I'd like
than
to
having
reinforce
do-
Hazel's point, though, if I think I understood it, which is, focus on the state legislation. COVID, this is acts of governor. This board didn't weigh in on these temporary structures, and it seems simplest and most straightforward. We just return to regular governance. The town is returning to the rules and regulations that were enforced before COVID. This is an action by the state. And so we're under no obligation. We're under an obligation to enforce the rules and regulations that we have as a planning board. And so, in other words, and looking at it from a business owner's, if Harry's found out, through this process that it was a real marketing coup to have more outside seating, that's wonderful. But, then they have to make the business decision as an enterprise owner to say, we want to put some capital at risk to make this permanent as a part of our business, and we have to conform to the laws. It would be silly for us, in my opinion, to look to grant waivers simply because of this pandemic cloud that's asked local governments to kind of suspend a lot of the ways that they operate.
I agree with that.
Let's drop back and then see what the owners want to do.
But I also think that, from the standpoint of, helping a small business recover from this and understanding that, the burden of providing all of these documents when, sometimes they might not all be necessary. And I think there's a reason we have the waiver authority, and I don't think it hurts them to ask us, and we can consider it on a case-by-case basis.
I don't know the precedent from past boards, but I would say, have others sought waivers? And if so, what sort of sensitivities do we discuss? So it's a
I think you want to
case-by-case
be really
basis.
careful not to imply we're going to waive everything.
Yeah.
So and this is more of a rhetorical statement than anything. I don't expect any kind of response necessarily, and I don't know what his intent is, but at Toros, for instance, they technically don't need parking because they're in the downtown business area. But you can imagine what happens if they suck up to 40 parking spaces?
Yeah, well, again, as a business, they understand that. I mean, if you have no parking, then I'm not going to park downtown and walk to Arturo's. So they have to make that decision. I think that's an intuitive decision.
You hope so.
Well, I mean, they can, but then if people don't come because they can't park, then they'll regret it.
Again, I'm not going to sit here and tell Arturo's owner, what an appealing dinner experience is, but I can say that, the dining room is really nice. Quite as nice as the dining room.
No, but basically, all these restaurants have been pushed because of COVID. So we can't ignore the fact that, I know the regulations are there, I know all that, but the restaurants we're speaking of most likely never would have went outside in the extent that we're talking about less COVID. So now that COVID has sort of gone away, they're all looking at that and saying, well, that was a benefit, and maybe we'll never get to the inside seating we once had. So I don't know that you could ignore COVID and how you look at the regulations for that fact. And that business seems to be the most affected for whatever reason.
I think where we had agreed previously, if the state didn't act, that we were open to waiving most of these things on a temporary basis. I agree with that, but for permanent changes, that's where I think the line is.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider waivers, but it can't be come in and ask us to waive every, take the handbook, I want you to waive everything. That's not going to happen. I think there's a common sense, if they can demonstrate that they're complying with zoning, asking for a reasonable waiver, I'll consider it. I don't think, I don't think that request is undesirable, but I agree with Tim that go back to business the way it was.
Well, I disagree with you, Mark. I don't know that we'll ever be back to business the way we were.
But again,
for
then
those.
we'd have to change the rules.
No, but I get that, but maybe we need to for those restaurants. I don't know.
Maybe we need to what?
Maybe we need to for that particular business.
But I think that's a fair consideration, but then we'd have to change the rules.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we can just decide.
And
The Restaurant Association pushed, one of the things I saw in the news today, pushed really hard to extend the suspension of the open container rule, because it's been a helpful recovery. We all know the restaurant business survives on alcohol sales. And, I didn't hear, the law enforcement community speak out against not extending that. But the ABCC, everyone said, well, wait a minute. No, we're going to fall back to the way that it was. And that was, an economic hit for those restaurants who have now grown accustomed to that revenue stream. But I think when you're measuring governance, you have to at least regroup and say, what were the rules and regulations that we put in place to run our community? And now that we've returned, it's certainly reasonable to say we might consider something different as a result of this major event. But we would consider that on a permanent basis and to apply to all restaurants, as Hazel said, so that there wouldn't be like we're going to make up a rule because one restaurant applied for something and then we're around trying to create rules for everybody. If we're going to relax waivers and rules, we should make it available to all the restaurants at the same time. So I'd be open to, I'd be more comfortable with knowing that we were following some guidelines. Hopefully the restaurants will let Zach know or let you guys know what they think they're going to do. Or
Yeah, and this may be a non-issue, because if it's only one restaurant, then it's kind of an easy thing. You just deal with that one restaurant. I don't know what the flavor of the other 10 or 11 are yet, to be honest with you. He's the only one that's reached out to me or reached out to our department to tell us that that's what they would like to do permanently.
Go ahead.
Just to try and frame this discussion with regard to other permits. So we also grant special permits for uses. Sometimes they used to include restaurants. We don't do that anymore for restaurants. We approve residential developments through the subdivision approval process. Both of those processes have rules and regulations that have been in place for many, many, many years. However, each time one of those projects comes forward, particularly with subdivisions, they'll ask the board for a waiver because there are extenuating circumstances either about the project site or because their design can make a better project, and the board weighs the merits of whether or not waiving their rules in these circumstances makes a better project. And if it does, you tend to give them the waiver. But each time, any waiver cannot compromise any public safety. Fred would let you know if something compromised public safety. I would let you know. But the thing is, you don't change the rules because you've decided that these rules are general and should be applicable in all circumstances. If circumstances drastically change, like they did temporarily under COVID, then that's temporary, and you adopt a temporary set of rules. But when they go back to normal, you go back to your normal rules. If you think there's a permanent change, then that's a reason to readdress your rules and make a permanent change in the rules. But if you don't think it's a permanent change, I suggest that you look at the existing rules and you weigh the merits of each proposal. So if someone comes in and says, I'd like you to waive the following, for the following reasons, you determine whether or not it's reasonable based on the intention of the rules.
All I'm suggesting, right, it's, if somebody comes in, whether it be Harry's or any of the other restaurants or any applicant that comes in for site plan approval, asking for a waiver, whether it be spillover on lighting to the detention basin next door, right? That's a reasonable waiver that we discussed earlier tonight, right? Same thing goes for these restaurants. If they have a reasonable request for a waiver, I don't think this board would ever not consider that. I mean, but I agree with the point. The rules are there, and, we don't have the authority to just change the rules because.
Fair enough.
just on Harry's, since we've been discussing it, does the taking of the parking there, have you analyzed it, whether that puts them out of compliance with zoning or not?
I don't know, one, because Harry's doesn't have a delineated parking lot, so we got to start there. There's kind of an accepted rule of parking, but
so that's why you need a site plan review again.
You would need some kind of site plan to start there. I don't think we have. Wow, I'm lying. I haven't.
Currently, they would be grandfathered in from any parking requirement, and
there's nothing that's really triggered an analysis out there, to be honest with you, Mark. So there's no reason to really look to see what the parking is. but I think you'd be hard pressed to go out there and count spots because they don't exist on the pavement. I mean, it's
True. You just know where to park.
you if you go to Harris, you kind of know how to park and where to park, but that's,
The first person there, you line up.
that doesn't help the board too much to figure out. So that's one of the conversations I'll have to have with him, because he thinks that he has, even though he's expanded in the parking lot, he already has, okay parking because he just moves the spots. That's not really how that works.
Well, I think also that particular site could become a public safety problem with the number of people in the parking lot and then trying to get out of the parking lot. So, I think there's more than one thing that may have to be considered with that particular.
Yeah, asking them to delineate the parking could evaluate whether or not there's a public safety issue.
But all of that is the point of site plan approval.
Right, exactly. That's the point. Exactly, and that's why you keep site plan approval.
Again, let's hope the state offers some solution that will enable us to close the book on this, but, as far as permanent relief, I don't see that as already, so I think we've talked about it enough. Anyone else?
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, last item on the agenda, other than minutes, is the master plan update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, we received an email from VHB regarding the implementation phase of the master plan, and they're feverishly working to put together this last phase for our review. They're a little bit off the time schedule. They're a little bit behind, but that's not entirely their fault. As you know, many of our subcommittees reported to them late. So they're doing their very best. They want to let us know that they're working on the implementation plan. So the next intention of the time schedule is to receive the implementation chapter. That will be circulated to the advisory committee and, of course, the planning board. And for us to comment, then they will produce the entire document, which will then be circulated to town departments for 2 weeks for comment, and then presented to the planning board and the board of selectmen and any other boards. I would suggest that we have one meeting rather than have it like a traveling road show. It's totally up to you.
Questions? I actually looking at this copy of the agenda, and I don't see approval of minutes on here, so maybe we should table that to the next.
I just sent them out today.
It wasn't the
Yeah, they
intent to
just
approve
came.
those tonight. It
Yeah.
was
So
just-
that's fine, we'll take that up at the next meeting. Any other business, Jim?
You're going to have a busy meeting, the first meeting in July.
Yes, we have. Kristen, anything else? No? Okay.
Motion to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we have a motion, any discussion, all those in favor? That's 5-0 to adjourn. Jim?
Someone over on the side over there. Okay.